Hello and welcome to Wake Up Wednesday. You know what other people call Wednesday? They call it Hump Day because it's the middle of the week and I don't know, maybe you need to just start humping or something. Or you're just trying to get over the hump, whatever it is. I feel you. This Wednesday, however, I have a very special guest. Anna, her name is Anna Sandana, and Anna came to me at CrimeCon. Actually, we connected before CrimeCon, then I met her at CrimeCon, and she was a delight of a human. She does work that we all need and to understand, but she has gotten in the inside and done the work that we all don't actually want to do with sexual predators. She gets into their minds. She figures out what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and protecting us along the way. So Anna wrote a book called Duck, Duck, Groom, and she sat down with me to discuss her book, what she's done, and how we can protect ourselves and our kids along the way. So please welcome Anna, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Clink, clink. Okay, today we are talking to Anna Sonoda. She has a book out called Duck, Duck, Groom. Correct, Anna?
That is correct, Tabitha. Thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited to talk to you because recently, although I don't do cases on children, my listeners and myself have I have lots of kids, and all my listeners, not all of them, but most of them have kids or have nieces, nephews, young adults living with them that are at ages that can be groomed in a way. And so you are an expert in this situation. And so when you asked, when we met and said, hey, I think it would be good for your podcast, I said, actually, I think you are correct.
Yeah, this is one of those topics that nobody wants to talk about, but we all need this education.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, unlike any other prevention, we talk about how to prevent illness by washing hands. We talk about fire prevention with stop, drop, and roll. Nobody is out there talking about child sexual abuse from the lens of grooming. And I really felt like there was a gap there. As a mom of five myself, I knew that we needed to do a better job. And as you know, moms get things done. So that's where the book came from. And now this movement that I'm really trying to grow across this country about educating people about grooming in a way that makes sense. Because too often we hear the word, but we don't really know what it means.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. And let me ask you before you um, start guiding us through this, did you have any personal experience or how did you decide to get involved besides having
That's a
five kids? And I mean, like, what the heck? How do I prevent this?
So that's a great question. I started my academic path and knew that I wanted to do something working with couples or adults. And so I went to go get my master's in social work. And during that program, you're required to do an internship. So they give us a list of all of the different places where we can go and practice clinical skills. Well, one of the listed places was a cognitive behavioral therapy environment for convicted sex offenders. Now, you can probably imagine everyone was turning the opposite direction and
Yes.
saying, oh, I'm definitely not going to pick that one. At
Yeah.
the time, I considered I don't have any personal experience with this subject. I'm not a survivor myself, but I knew that if I wanted to work with adults, that sex, sexuality, intimacy, all of those issues were going to be involved. And so I thought at the time, well, I'll do this because it's something I know nothing about and I have a lot of room for growth. And little did I know that clinical experience and the years afterwards when I stayed on as a clinician taught me more than I would ever imagine and led me to understand that there is an enormous gap between what clinicians know about sex offenders and predation and what we teach and how we teach everyday parents, everyday teachers, the individuals who are in youth serving environments who we rely on every day. Like you, I'm not with my kids right now, but I'm relying on caring adults to not only keep my kids safe, but also recognize some of the issues that may be in those environments and
Hmm.
then know how to call it out. So that is what led to my calling to put the book out there in a way that wasn't fear based because there's so much fear already. As a mom, I know that. We don't need more fear. Um, we're overextended when it comes to fear, but we do need something practical. So my motto is all about we need to move from paranoia to preparation. So what does that look like? It looks like having blunt, open conversations about the grooming process because when you ask survivors of this heinous crime of child sexual abuse, you find that 99% of the time, survivors report having at least one grooming behavior done in their case. And this is something that we don't talk about. We often think about child sexual abuse as random or coming out of nowhere. But what we know and what research shows us is that there's a clear ramp up period, and that ramp up period is called grooming. So if we can educate families about what grooming looks like, if we can educate kids about what grooming looks like, then we will do a much better job of disabling a predator's efforts and placing the fear on them rather than the fear on the parents.
Hmm. So tell me, you said at least one kind of grooming experience that a kid has come up and said. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that they were around it, that they did something to provoke it, or does that mean? I mean, I kind of I got lost a little bit.
Sure. So it means that when we analyze a survivor's experience of childhood sexual abuse, we discover that grooming is a piece of 99% of those crimes. So many people
Okay.
already know that up to 93% of the time, the predator is going to be somebody known and trusted to not only the victim, but also the victim's care system, care team, parents, guardians, all the adults around that child. So it's critically important that we shift our lens from thinking about child sexual abuse as an event and more like a perverse form of courtship. So,
Mm, okay.
courtship is gradual, it happens over time. Similarly, grooming is a perverse form of courtship. And in a way, predators are gently testing bit by bit to try and get closer to the child, build trust with the care providers around that child, and gain access to be with that
Access.
child alone. Yes.
Okay. So that's what you're saying. And that's scary, right? Because at the end of the day, you're telling me that probably most people, 93% of people, had no idea that this person could do that to their child because they trusted them.
Yes. And moreover, good parents are not handing their children over to a stranger. We go out of our way to make sure that we're vetting babysitters, tutors, youth programs, camp venues, schools. So it's even more of an insult. It's even more of an injury when those crimes are committed by the very people that we believe we have vetted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, what are some things to that we as parents can, I guess, work on opening our lenses and reducing our fear?
Yes, well, what I like to remind parents of is because it's a gradual process, this can sometimes take weeks, months, even years. What offenders taught me is that they are patient. They are serial offenders and they are patient, so they are willing to wait, but they put themselves in environments to have access to kids. So, grooming can be understood as the 4F formula: flattery, favoritism, forbidden fruits, and fear. So, what I tell parents to look out for is that individual who goes out of their way to compliment my family, compliment my child, anyone who's showing my child that they're the best on the team or the teacher's pet or the one who's exceptional. Oh, I've never taught a child like you before. I've never coached a player as incredible as you are. I really need to take more time with you. I need to single you out from the rest of the group. These environments in which many children are together, it can often be an opportunity for a potential predator to pick out one or two of those individuals to say, it's really important that I spend more time with you. And for many parents, and I have been guilty of this too, we get a lot of our meaning from how other people see and perceive our family and our children. And it seems like it's a heightened culture of that right now with social media and postings and things like that. But what we have to remember is that predators who are convincing us that they are trustworthy or convincing us that they need to have one on one time with our children or time without supervision or trying to reject our participation in events, whether in just being on the sidelines or having things take place in our home and they'd rather it take place in their home without another adult present. Those are enormous red flags for us as parents to be aware of and to consider and then to respond to. Too often, many people, many of your listeners may not know that only 30% of all childhood sexual abuse is reported. Of that 30%, more than 50% are thrown out because of an absence of evidence. So when we
Oh,
look at a list like the sex offender registry, for example, which many moms and dads come to me and say, very proudly, I checked the sex offender registry before we moved into our apartment or moved into our
mhm.
house. What we have to remember is that document of is one tool, but it is missing more than 70% of the offenses that have happened across our country. So that means that as a parent, I need to be a keen observer. I need to look up. I need to show up. I need to look up, and I need to speak up when I see something that is off. Because the comforting thing that I learned from the offenders and then raising my own five kids is that most people are not predators. We actually outnumber the predators who are in youth serving environments, whether in schools or hobbies or sports. So that means we have a vested interest to educate all of those other administrators, other coworkers, all the
Mhm.
other adult volunteers to figure out and to be able to recognize, oh, what is grooming? Oh, if I notice that a teacher is going out of their way to take a child off campus or to take a child out of the cafeteria and have lunch with them in their room privately with the door closed. As a teacher, I need to know that that's something that is an outlier because predation stands out. Predators stand out in the way that they behave. And too often it's all of the other adults around that person who fail to keep that child safe.
Yeah, because I see in general society, no one wants to step on toes, right? They're like, oh, well, I don't know that he's doing anything or she's doing anything. I don't have proof of that. But the proof is, and it doesn't even have to be proof. Like, let's just say it doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, then let's just not make it right. Like, even if it, even if, say, Miss Mary Joe is having, Sally come in every Thursday for her special lunch. Nobody else is coming in for a special lunch on Thursday. And so we're like, this is weird. It's clearly weird. All the other teachers think it's weird. No one's saying anything because we don't really know if anything's going on with Sally and Miss whatever. Um, but it should be it should be talked about and it should be squashed, right? Because it's weird.
Yes, and I'm so glad you used that word. I have a parent-child book coming out in a couple of months, and when I did my research for that book, I contacted forensic child sexual assault centers across the country. And they said the number one word that kids use when they experience grooming or child sexual abuse is weird. So, as a family system, we have an opportunity not to use the term that is floating around now, which is tricky people. I don't know about you, but tricky people doesn't mean anything to me. That
No,
doesn't
it doesn't.
that doesn't clear anything. If anything, it creates more questions. So we have to start using words that children are using. So when they recognize something as being weird, that's not necessarily the time to turn away or the time to say, oh, don't be judgmental. That's actually the time to come closer in with your child and to say, tell me more about that. What was weird about the interaction with the
Mhm.
coach? What was weird about the PE changing in the locker room today? Because when it becomes an open conversation in our households, then it can trickle out into our neighborhoods, our communities, into the youth serving environments. Because one thing that I've learned is that just as important as it is to protect children, it's critically important to protect adult reputations. If I or my husband go and volunteer on a school campus trip or chaperone an overnight trip, I want to know that every policy that's in place not only protects kids, but protects me and my reputation and makes sure that it is completely above board. And too
Mhm.
often, adults are bailing out of mentorship roles. We're seeing a huge decline in people joining groups like Boys and Girls Club of America and other mentorship roles because they're afraid that institutions don't have their back. So this is a twofold problem. We need to make sure that adult mentors feel safe and protected by the policies threaded into everyday interactions with youth, and we need to know and arm youth to partner with us for their protection and prevention.
Yeah, and so how do people go about partnering with you um, for that? Because I feel like you could do a lot of good across the nation. I mean, everybody can grab your book. How do we get this to everybody? I mean, I'm sure that's your
So
mission.
it's part of the mission. So one way that people, a few ways. So one way that people can support this movement is to read the book. The last paragraph of Duck Duck Groom is to pass it on. I don't care if you get a version from your neighbor, but we need to put this book in libraries across the country. I already have several states that have it stocked in their library system. This needs to become something that book clubs are talking about, that PTAs are talking about, that youth sports is talking about, because this moves us from a position of fear into a position of empowerment. And we can gain a lot more traction as a community when we all pair together, read the recommendations. It's not going to protect us to know why a sex offender is the way a sex offender is. But it certainly will if we figure out how they do what they do. And Duck Duck Groom and this movement is all about moving from why to how, because it's in how they do it that we can actually do something. So, getting a copy of the book, read the book, pass it on to somebody who might need it. Individuals can start a conversation in their youth sports or in their
Mhm.
children's schools or in their children's daycare to figure out what are we doing really well. This isn't just punitive. This is about assessing what are we doing really well? How can we be an example to other daycares, to other schools, to other youth sports? Because we know that statistics indicate that individuals who are working with children are not trained, and they're certainly not trained when it comes to child sexual abuse. We have some pockets, within the Catholic Church or the Scouts of America organizations that have rolled out widespread requirements for trainings, but we still have many gaps in the system. And I think when everybody uh, picks up their bootstraps and says, this isn't going to happen on our watch. Every single day, Tabitha, I get on the computer and I'm reading about cases of child sexual abuse. I'm reading about it in schools or in sports or in youth activities. And this is 2025. I've had it. I know that you've had it. And it's about time that we all gather our esteem and work towards a better outcome. So that means we're going to set policies like two adults at all times with kids. It might mean that we have a cultural shift around things like overnights or sleepovers where you have a hotbed environment. When I teach or do trainings, I educate people that predators run on gas, grooming, access, and space. So if we just enabled parents from birth to graduation about how to have those conversations, because at the start of this discussion, you said you have many contacts who have children. And I can tell you that as my children have grown, the conversation has shifted and changed bit by bit. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean the conversation is over after we explain using real body part names, for example, but that looks different when I'm dealing with a middle schooler, and it looks different again when I'm talking to my high schoolers. So, this is something that we as parents need to not defer to someone else, and we can each do our part if we know what we are working with.
Yeah. And how did you get involved? I mean, I know how you got involved with these predators, but how did you get them to talk to you about their process?
Well, when you're mandated to treatment, as these individuals were, you have weekly sessions for an hour, in addition to group therapy sessions where the individuals would sit around in a group. And at the time, I really believed that that was my community service, helping these individuals not recommit crimes.
Hmm.
And what I discovered day after day in the room was they were unpackaging the steps they took, how they perceived vulnerability in the children that they targeted, how they were assessing a potential partner who had minors living in the home, and what partnering with that person would enable them to be able to do to those children. And this is something I don't feel should be a secret. This should be something that is widely shared, widely expressed, because for too long it is hidden behind a clinical door, and I believe this message needs to get out in the right way to everyday parents
Hmm.
because we know better now, we know more now, and I think parents want this kind of information. Back in the day when I was being raised, it was the era of stranger danger and, men in scary trucks or big white
Yeah.
vans. And nowadays, we have children who are online in gaming platforms who are then picked up overnight and found several states over because a predator befriended them online, groomed them, made them feel comfortable and trusted, and usurped parental authority by abducting that child. This is untenable. In a recent blog I wrote this week, I talk about how a movement like Smokey the Bear. Do you remember Smokey the
Yes.
Bear from
Yep.
growing up?
I
So
sure
what
do.
was Smokey the Bear's objective or mission? Do you remember?
Yes, to alert you of fire, right?
Yes. And one of the taglines of Smokey the Bear is only you can prevent forest fires. And I want to bring a Smokey the Bear attitude to child sexual abuse. I want all of us to feel that sense of ownership and responsibility, that
Hmm.
we need to be looking out for environments that are not tending well to our children, and then calling attention to it, whether it's through notifying the administration, whether it's notifying the media, or simply calling out odd or peculiar or weird behavior, as we talked about before. Because one thing that the predators taught me is that most importantly, they want to avoid attention. They do not want to be found out, and they want to operate under the radar. So, simply sometimes, just by having a confrontation, simply by calling out behavior in a public
Hmm.
venue in front of other teachers or in front of other parents or players, you could change the course of a whole community because predators are like frogs. They're going to lily pad jump from one environment to a next to the next. And I'm not sure if you've experienced this with in your own community, but we often see that it's a teacher who then there's maybe some whispers, loud whispers happening about their behavior, and then they go to another school,
Yes.
or they're in a religious environment, and then they move to another religious building or a religious community or another church. This is unacceptable. And part of the reason it's unacceptable is because we have improperly trained today's parents. There's no practice, there's no script. We have failed today's parents. And I'm trying bit by bit. This conversation helps tremendously to spread this idea and spread the concept that instead of focusing on child sexual abuse, we must focus on the 99% of behaviors, visible, observable, intentional behaviors that lead to child sexual abuse events.
Well, I mean, I commend you for bringing out what you learned in your sessions because I think you're right, right? Like you learned a lot. I also applaud you for sitting in there and not murdering all of them because I think I would have. Um, so you are a better person than me. And then you also took that and said, you know what, this is what people need to hear. This is what we need to do to protect ourselves because no one is talking about exactly what these guys or girls are doing. And yes, I have had in my community, there has been a fair share, even as of recent, uh, allegations of sexual abuse um, in and around, or, substitutes, all this stuff. But um, there was one recently where it was an aide, and these kids, they did feel that something was off. And they went to their parents and they said, something's weird, exactly that, and then the parents went to the administration, and then that person was um, sent on leave to investigate the situation. But it's also one of those things that you said. It was a hopping situation. This person was here, and then this person was an aide here, and then now here. So those are red flags. If you're hopping around, why are you hopping around so much?
Yes, and it's incredibly important. And I'm so glad you brought up this story because one of the things that we implore agencies and schools and youth group activities to do is to call prior employers and ask, would this person be eligible for rehire? I know
Mm-hmm.
for HIPAA reasons, you can't necessarily ask if they were let go. But too often I hear from individuals who say, oh, well, that teacher was sleeping with students, but because the age of consent in that state is 16, there were no criminal charges, but that person moved on to teach in a different environment. Excuse me, I don't want a teacher who believes it's acceptable in any way to be working with adolescent and teenagers who thinks that's acceptable. So
No.
we don't have all of the tools, and we're all relying on a background check. Do you know how silly that is, that we are looking backwards to determine whether or not someone is safe in the future? And what we know already and what we've already talked about is that we barely scratch the surface of convicting individuals who commit these crimes.
Yeah.
So we're working with with blinders on, with a blindfold and blinders on as parents. And we're assuming a lot about environments. And when else do we do that? Never. We over research our pediatricians, we research what kind of food we're going to give our kids. So this should be like all of those decisions. We should be equipped with what grooming actually looks like. The 4F formula should be something that we teach new parents, not because we are paranoid that they are going to be groomed, but because we know that in households that talk about child sexual abuse, we have lower instances of child sexual abuse. I know that when my kids enter a camp environment, a school environment, a sport environment, they know that an individual who's trying to look at them in the changing room or trying to be alone with them or identifying them as exceptional or special in some way is notable, and they should be alerting their father and I as soon as possible. These are not things that we're talking openly with about our kids. And even as we speak, kids are online for up to 9 hours per day. Predators know that they can bypass me. They don't even need to come into the household anymore to access
Yeah.
my kids. They can go through their devices. And I talk to countless parents who say, I thought my child was safe. They were down the hall, they were inside the house. And yet, this individual was capable of coming into our home via a device. So it is paramount that we have the dialogue we're having today, and that your audience takes this information and even starting a conversation in their own household at the dinner table with their child in the car and saying, what do you know about this subject? What are your friends talking about this subject? Because one thing that I would also like to point out is that when children speak up about child sexual abuse, 60% of the time, do you know who they tell?
I would think their parents
They tell their
or their
friend.
sibling.
They
Oh,
tell
their
a friend.
friend. They don't tell their
So
mom or their dad. Maybe they're just kind of, uh, oh, you're probably right. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think if somebody was to reach out to my son on his device, he probably would tell his best friend, like, hey, I got this message from, you know, ABC user, and not tell me because he would know that I would quash the game. I would throw the game away.
that's right. You would
Yeah.
limit all of his access to all of
Yes.
his
Yes.
gaming.
That's
So
right.
so even if I know that my children are safe and you know your children are safe, we have to remember that our kids are not being raised in a vacuum. They're being raised with other children, other households, other environments. So it behooves us as a family to have these conversations because God forbid my child be on a bus riding next to a child who says, hey, I have a secret to share with you about
Oh,
what happens
yeah.
when I get home at nighttime, about what happens when my stepbrother comes into my room, or what happens when my dad comes into the room, or what happens when I go off to my sport camp. These are things that we need to be having because it might be your child who is sitting with a child who gets the opportunity to come back and say, whoa, I heard something really weird on the bus, at school, on the playground.
Yeah. You're right. I actually have an incident that I know about, and I knew far after, but I knew um, the child told me after this person was arrested that the friend confided in him, and he was like, we were both taking it to our graves. But I'm like, you are a kid,
Oh, doesn't it
and
break your heart?
yes, yeah, because that's also a lot for a child to carry. That's not. It's a lot for both of those children to carry, but yeah,
So that's why one of the things I write about and talk about and speak about is the importance of explaining to our children the difference between privacy, secrecy, and surprise. My
mm-hmm.
kids know that we don't keep secrets, and that when somebody tells them, don't tell anyone, let's keep this between you and I, this is just our little secret, um, you know, all the different ways that you can say, let's keep this a secret, that is an enormous red flag for them to come and tell their father or myself.
Mm-hmm.
So we can have these conversations in casual ways. Too
Yeah,
many times I get emails from parents who say, I want to have this conversation with my child, but I don't want to scare them. And what I have to tell those parents is, look, your children know a lot more than you think they know,
yes,
especially in 2025, being raised with all of the fences down. Um, and it is so important to be the cornerstone relationship. Predator after predator would tell me, these kids didn't feel special. They didn't feel seen at home. They didn't feel like they were important to anyone. And I was able to make inroads with this child because I gave them attention. I listened to them. I made eye contact with them. I put everything else away and I only wanted to spend time with them. Now, to you and I, that feels disgusting and
yes,
gross, but it's easy to understand that if you're a young child living in a household or even in a loving household, if you don't necessarily feel seen or special or cared for, that a potential predator is going to exploit that.
Yeah.
And that's information that most parents need to be reminded of.
Yeah. I agree with you. All right. So everybody should get a copy of your book. Um, Everybody out there, because even if you do not have a child in your house, I bet you know somebody that does. And so this is actually a good gift too to give somebody that has a kid, although it is a scary topic, but let's not make it scary. Let's just make it real and get it out there to everybody. I think I'm going to give this a copy of this to each of my kids' schools. It's called Duck Duck Groom, and it's by Anna Sonoda. You can get it where? Amazon, I'm sure. Did you do also an audiobook, Anna?
Yes, I
Okay.
narrated the audiobook and it's available on Amazon in paperback as well as in hardback for ease of like library systems.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my goals is that we have all 50 states and all territories having a copy of this book. So there's not a financial barrier to people having this information. And
Good.
one of the things that your recent comment just made me think of too is that our older children have read this book along with us. So, depending on the maturity and the age of your children, this could be a really interesting family read as they
Mm-hmm.
prepare for whether it's middle school or high school or college. These concepts don't end after the age of consent. When we're thinking about living in a dorm or college professors interacting with young females or males, when we're thinking about first jobs or any vulnerable position they may be in, even after the age of consent, it's useful for them to have this concept of what does manipulation actually look like? How
Yeah.
might that take shape? Because it doesn't start off aggressive and mean, it actually starts off sweet.
Yes, I totally agree with you because I had an incident early on when I just graduated college, my first job, you know. And so you're right, it doesn't stop at 12 or 10 or whatever. I think it's a great read for high schoolers, especially because you start kind of letting go, or and the kids really want to let go in high school, right? They start wanting to kind of just be with their friends and be out and about and going to their friend's house, going to the mall, doing, teenage things. And that I feel is a very vulnerable time in kids' lives that also probably feels pretty good to be liked by somebody older and maybe not 50, 60, but maybe 20, 25. And predators are all ages. It doesn't just come from the old man in the white van.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so grateful to you for making the time in your schedule to have this conversation because we know this is an ongoing issue and a problem that one child of there are probably countless children who are currently dealing with these issues across America, and it might be this conversation that one person listens to or something that they heard today that could alter the course of a child's life.
Yeah.
And I really thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come and share this message and this movement with your audience.
Yes. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you. You are doing great things. You're an amazing lady, and I'm glad to know you. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Yes. Okay, you guys, that was Anna. Did you just find yourself freaked the F out? Because that is where I go. However, I think we all need to read this book, Duck Duck Groom, and figure out even more ways to protect our kiddos and the future of our kiddos. So, thank you, Anna, for doing all the due diligent work that you do. I do have a copy to give somebody of Anna's book, a digital copy. And so please email me or go on my social media and follow me and DM me, and I will pick somebody to give Anna's book to. I am at Tab the Housewife or Housewives of True Crime. You can go to either one of those, and I will be happy to pick somebody to forward along her book. I hope you enjoyed this Wednesday's episode, and I will be back tomorrow with Housewives of True Crime bonus. So if you follow me on Apple, it's the Clink Clink Club. If you follow me on Spotify, it's Housewives of True Crime bonus content. And if you listen on none of those, then you can find me on patreon.com/Housewives of True Crime. So I will see you tomorrow if you are so inclined to sign up for that. And if not, I will be back on Monday with a very interesting case that will take you throughout the entire week, actually. And you will hear more about that Monday. Clink, clink.